The specimen jar slipped from Riley Cross's fingers and shattered across the laboratory floor. Purple gel splattered everywhere, mixed with rock samples she'd spent 6 hours collecting from Tethys 7's deepest mining shaft. She stared at the mess, then at the 3 alien scientists watching her from across the room. None of them moved to help. They just exchanged those looks again, the one she'd been seeing since she arrived at Station Galileo 2 weeks ago to Dr. Halver clicked his mandibles together, a sound Riley had learned meant disapproval. The Centaurian scientist's compound eyes reflected the harsh laboratory lights as he turned back to his workstation. His assistant, a tall being named Shurith with skin like polished stone, simply walked around the spill as if Riley and her mistake didn't exist. Riley grabbed the cleaning supplies herself. The gel was already eating into the metal flooring, standard for geological samples from this moon. She worked quickly, aware of how the other researchers kept their distance. Not because the gel was dangerous. They'd seen Shurith handle the same substance with bare hands yesterday. No, they kept their distance from her. The door hissed open and Grevin entered, his reptilian features arranged in what Riley had learned to recognize as concern. The Thelusian security officer was one of the few beings on this station who treated her like an actual colleague instead of fragile cargo. "You need assistance?" Grevin's voice rumbled deep in his chest. "I've got it, thanks." Riley sealed the contaminated samples in a disposal unit and stood up. Her knees cracked audibly in the quiet lab. Halver's mandibles clicked again. The human joints deteriorate rapidly in station gravity, Halver announced to no one in particular, tapping something into his datapad. Further evidence of structural inadequacy. Riley bit her tongue. Literally. She'd been doing that a lot lately, hard enough that she'd tasted blood twice this week. Better than saying what she actually thought. Grevin's eyes narrowed. "Her work output exceeds yours by 30%, Doctor. Output and durability are separate considerations." Halver pulled up a holographic display that showed a rotating human skull next to several alien anatomical structures. "My preliminary report on human physiology will be distributed to all department heads tomorrow. The Coalition needs to understand the limitations of Earth species before assigning them to frontier stations." Riley's hands clenched at her sides. She'd seen drafts of that report. Halver had measured bone density, skeletal structure, muscle attachment points. His conclusions painted humans as barely capable of surviving outside controlled environments. Words like fragile, vulnerable, and unsuitable for standard operations appeared throughout the document. What made it worse was that Halver wasn't cruel. He genuinely believed he was helping, advocating for special accommodations and protective measures for human crew members. He'd recommended humans be restricted from EVA operations, heavy equipment handling, and emergency response teams. All for their own safety, of course. The other species on Station Galileo had accepted his findings without question. Why wouldn't they? Halver was the station's chief xenobiologist, responsible for ensuring all crew members could perform their duties in Tethys 7's environment. His report would become official Coalition policy for human assignments. Riley had tried explaining that humans were tougher than their scan suggested. She'd mentioned persistence, hunting, endurance capabilities, adaptive resistance. Halver had nodded politely and added a note about species-typical overestimation of personal capabilities to his report. The preliminary medical data shows human jaw structure particularly concerning. Halver continued, zooming in on the skull diagram. The mandible appears designed for minimal force application. Bite capacity estimated at barely 700 newtons, far below station's safety requirements. Safety requirements for what? Riley couldn't help asking. Emergency situations often require physical problem solving. Equipment malfunctions may need direct force application when tools fail. Halver gestured at his own pronounced jaw structure. Centaurian bite force exceeds 4,000 newtons. Thelusian capacity reaches 5,000. Even the pick engineers, despite their small size, demonstrate over 2,000 newtons of jaw strength. Yenna, one of those small pick engineers, poked her furry head through the doorway. "Riley? Commander Orith needs geological assessment for the new mining sector. Something about unstable crystalline formations. Riley grabbed her survey equipment, grateful for the escape. As she left the lab, she heard Halver speaking to Shurith about recommended restrictions for human crew members. The list was growing longer. The station corridors bustled with activity. Species from a dozen worlds moved past her, all confident in their place here. Riley had dreamed about joining a coalition research station since she was 12 years old. She'd studied for 16 years, earned 3 advanced degrees, survived the brutal selection process. Only 17 humans currently served on frontier stations out of thousands of applicants. And now she was becoming the reason they might stop accepting humans altogether. Commander Orith waited in the survey preparation room, his aquatic features passive as always. The Kelton commander had been fair to Riley, judging her only on work quality. But even he'd started asking if she needed additional rest periods or lighter duty assignments. The readings from Shaft 7 are concerning, Orith said, pulling up sensor data. We need boots on the ground before tomorrow's extraction operation. Riley studied the information. Unstable crystalline lattices, high-pressure differentials, risk of cascade fractures. Standard geological assessment. Nothing she hadn't handled before. I'll take Grevin and 2 others. Should have preliminary data in 6 hours. Dr. Halver suggested we wait for the relief crew next month. They're bringing specialized equipment rated for human operators. There was again the careful assumption that she couldn't handle standard operations. Riley met Orith's eyes. Commander, I can do this job. I've done 100 times on Earth's moon, on Mars, on 3 different asteroid stations. The equipment here is easier to use than anything I trained with. Orith was quiet for a long moment. Halver's report carries significant weight. If he's correct about human limitations, then I'll prove him wrong. The words came out harder than Riley intended. I'll prove him right, and you can ship me back to Earth. But let me do the job I was sent here to do. The commander's expression shifted slightly. Approval, maybe, or pity. Shaft 7. 6 hours. Take Grevin and choose your team. Riley left before he could reconsider. Tomorrow, Halver's report would circulate. After that, every mistake she made would be evidence. Every success would be dismissed as luck or accommodation. She had one chance to show the coalition that humans belonged here. She just wished she felt as confident as she'd sounded. The lift descended into Shaft 7 with a grinding sound that made Yenna's ears flatten against her skull. Riley checked her survey equipment for the 3rd time, while Grevin examined the structural supports with professional skepticism. The 4th member of their team, a Thelusian mineral specialist named Court, had already activated his scanning array. Temperatures rising faster than projections suggested, Court announced. His scaled hand moved across the display. The crystalline formations are generating more heat than they should. Riley consulted her own readings. The geological data showed unstable lattice structures throughout this section of the moon, but the thermal variance was unusual. Could indicate active stress fractures. We'll need to map the entire shaft before tomorrow's extraction. The lift jerked to a stop at level 47, deep enough that station communications would be spotty. Riley had done deeper surveys, but never on Tethys 7. Never on a moon where the rock formations actively resisted conventional scanning technology. The shaft opened into a cathedral-sized cavern. Crystalline structures jutted from every surface, glowing faintly with internal energy. Beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. Riley had learned to distrust beautiful geological formations. They usually killed people. Spread out, but stay within visual range, Grevin ordered. His security training made him default leader in the field, something Riley appreciated. She was better at reading rocks than managing people. They worked in efficient silence. Riley moved from formation to formation, taking measurements and recording structural data. The crystals hummed at a frequency just below her hearing range, vibrating through her bones. Yenna handled the remote sensors while Court analyzed mineral composition. Grevin maintained perimeter watch, though nothing down here posed a threat except the environment itself. 2 hours in, Riley noticed the pattern. The crystalline lattices weren't random. They formed interconnected networks that distributed stress across vast distances. Touch one formation, and the vibration would travel through dozens of others. The mining operation scheduled for tomorrow would hit a critical junction point. We need to recommend they delay extraction, Riley called out. These formations are load-bearing for the entire sector. Court looked up from his scanner. The mining schedule is fixed. The extraction contracts with the Centaurian Mining Consortium have penalty clauses for delays. Then they'll pay more when the entire shaft collapses. Riley moved to another cluster of crystals, confirming her suspicions. This isn't stable geology. It's barely controlled chaos. Grevin approached her position. Can you map safe extraction points? Maybe. Give me another hour. Riley pulled out her drilling sampler, a small device designed to take core samples without disturbing the surrounding material. She'd just positioned it against a crystal formation when the first tremor hit. The cavern shook hard enough to knock Yenna off her feet. Riley grabbed the nearest support beam, her sampler clattering to the ground. The crystal's hum rose to an audible shriek. Seismic event. Court shouted unnecessarily. Riley's training kicked in through the adrenaline. Not seismic. We triggered a resonance cascade. Everyone back to the lift. They ran. The cavern heaved again, stronger this time. A crystalline spear the size of Riley's leg crashed down where she'd been standing moments before. The glowing formations began shattering, each fracture triggering others in an expanding wave of destruction. Grevin reached the lift first and slammed the emergency activation. Nothing happened. He hit again, harder. The control panel remained dark. Power's cut, he snarled. Secondary systems aren't responding. Yenna frantically worked her portable terminal. The resonance frequency is interfering with station communications. We're isolated. Another tremor, worse than the previous ones. Part of the cavern's ceiling collapsed, showering them with debris. Riley felt something hot slice across her arm, but ignored it. They needed shelter, needed to stabilize their position until rescue could reach them. There, Court pointed at a service tunnel, one of dozens that connected the main shaft to smaller excavation sites. Emergency shelter protocols. Those tunnels have reinforced sections. They made it inside as the main cavern began its final collapse. The tunnel was narrow, forcing them to move single file. Emergency lighting flickered on, dim but functional. Riley could hear the destruction continuing behind them, the crystalline formations tearing themselves apart in a chain reaction that wouldn't stop until the entire sector exhausted its stored energy. The tunnel opened into a small staging area, one of the emergency shelter points Court had mentioned. Reinforced walls, independent life support, supplies rated for 72 hours. They'd be fine until station rescue teams could dig them out. Except the tunnel entrance was blocked, not by debris from the collapse behind them, but by twisted metal and rock that had fallen earlier, maybe during the initial tremor. And the emergency supplies locker had been crushed, leaving them with only what they carried. Grevin examined the blockage with growing concern. This is titanium alloy support framing. Grade 5, designed for mining operations. Must have been staged here for the extraction tomorrow. Riley studied the twisted metal. A massive piece of the framing had bent during the collapse, creating a U-shaped barrier that completely blocked their exit path. The sides were wedged against the tunnel walls. The middle section hung at chest height, too low to climb over and too high to slide under. Can we cut through it? Yenna's voice was steady despite the situation, but Riley could see her ears trembling. Not with what we have. Court checked his equipment pack. The plasma cutter is back in the main cavern. We have surveying tools, not rescue equipment. Grevin tried forcing the metal with his considerable strength. The Thelusian's muscles strained, his scales darkening with effort. The titanium alloy didn't budge. He tried again, this time with Court's help. Nothing. Life support, Riley asked. Yenna checked her readings. 4 hours of good air. Maybe 5 if we minimize movement. After that, carbon dioxide buildup becomes dangerous. Riley sat down hard, her mind racing through options. They couldn't cut the metal. They couldn't bend it. They couldn't climb over or dig under. Station rescue wouldn't reach them before their air ran out because nobody knew they were trapped in this specific location. She stared at the bent titanium, following its curve. The metal had twisted where a support bolt should have held it in place. The stress fracture ran along a specific line where the alloy had been compressed beyond its tolerance. If someone could break that stress point, the entire piece might shift enough to create an opening. The problem was that breaking titanium alloy required either specialized cutting tools or approximately 9,000 newtons of force applied to a very specific location. They had neither. Grevin was examining his injured arm, where a piece of crystal had gouged deep. The medical kit included basic supplies, but he needed proper treatment soon. Yenna sat with her back against the wall, conserving energy. Court methodically checked every piece of equipment they had, looking for something that might help. Riley kept staring at the stress fracture in the metal. Her teeth hurt. She'd been grinding her jaw without realizing it, a nervous habit that had gotten worse since arriving at Station Galileo. Her dentist back on Earth had warned her about it, said she'd crack a tooth eventually if she didn't stop. She stood up and walked to the twisted metal, running her fingers along the stress fracture. The alloy was cold, hard, utterly unyielding. Behind her, she could hear Court explaining to Yenna that station rescue protocols meant 12 hours before they'd even start searching secondary tunnels. They didn't have 12 hours. They had 4, maybe 5, and nobody was coming. Riley pressed her thumb against the stress fracture, feeling the sharp edge where the metal had begun to fail. Her jaw ached from clenching. Her arm throbbed where the crystal had cut her. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she remembered Halvor's voice talking about bite force measurements and human limitations, 0.700 newtons, he'd said. Barely adequate for basic survival needs. Weak jaws, fragile structure, unsuitable for frontier operations. Riley leaned closer to the metal, examining exactly where the stress fracture intersected with the bent section. The angle was awkward, but if someone could apply enough force to that specific point, I have an idea, she said quietly. The others looked at her with hope that made her stomach twist. Because her idea was insane. It violated every safety protocol she knew, and it probably wouldn't work, but neither would sitting here waiting to suffocate. Grevin's expression shifted from hope to concern as Riley explained her plan. Court shook his head immediately. Even Yenna's ears flattened completely against her skull, a clear sign of distress among her species. Absolutely not, Grevin said firmly. That alloy will shatter your teeth. Human dental structure cannot withstand that kind of pressure. Riley knelt beside the twisted metal, positioning her head at the awkward angle necessary to reach the stress fracture. Our other option is waiting for rescue that won't arrive in time. I'm open to suggestions. Silence answered her, because they all knew she was right. The metal is contaminated with geological residue. Cord added. Those protests sounded weak. Unknown chemical composition. Could be toxic to humans. Then I'll deal with toxic exposure after we're not suffocating. Riley examined the stress fracture one more time. The critical point was roughly the size of her thumb, where the titanium alloy had compressed and begun to fail. If she could apply enough force to that exact location, the molecular structure might complete its failure and cracked it if. Might. 2 words that summed up their entire situation. Yenna pulled up technical specifications on her terminal. Titanium grade 5 alloy. Tensile strength of 130,000 pounds per square inch. The stress fracture reduces that, but you would still need to apply approximately 9,000 newtons of force to cause complete failure. Dr. Halvor estimated human bite force at 700 newtons, Grevin said quietly. Even accounting for measurement error, you cannot generate sufficient force. Riley positioned herself carefully. The metal edge pressed against her teeth, cold and harder than anything she'd ever attempted to bite. Halvor's measurements were taken in a medical bay. Comfortable environment, no stress, no adrenaline. This is different. It's suicide, Court stated flatly. Maybe it was. Riley's hands shook as she braced herself against the tunnel wall. Her body was already flooded with adrenaline from the cave-in and the trap situation. Every survival instinct she possessed was screaming at her to find a way out. And humans, for all their seeming fragility, had evolved to do desperate things when survival demanded it. She'd read about it in her xenobiology courses. Humans lifting vehicles off trapped family members. Mothers fighting off predators that outweighed them by hundreds of pounds. People performing impossible feats when the only other option was death. The research called it hysterical strength, though the mechanism wasn't fully understood. Riley wasn't sure if she believed in hysterical strength, but she believed in 4 hours of air and no rescue coming. She believed in the 3 people depending on her, and she believed that Halvor's comfortable medical bay measurements didn't account for what humans could do when everything was on the line. "If this doesn't work, promise me you'll tell Commander Orith exactly what happened," Riley said. "Make sure he knows I chose this. Not your fault." "Riley." Grevin's voice was rough with emotion. She didn't let him finish. She bit down. The first sensation was simple pressure. The metal didn't yield, didn't even flex. Riley's jaw muscles burned as she applied more force. Her teeth screamed protest. The chemical residue on the metal tasted like copper and something else she couldn't identify. Not enough. She wasn't generating anywhere near the force needed. Riley closed her eyes and thought about Earth. Not the sanitized colony stations or the comfortable research facilities. She thought about old Earth, the planet that had forged humanity through millions of years of survival against impossible odds. She thought about ancestors who had crushed bones to access marrow, who had torn through hide and sinew to survive, who had developed jaw muscles and dental structures that could process anything edible because starvation was the only alternative. She bit harder. Her jaw muscles engaged in ways she'd never experienced. Pressure built not just in her teeth, but throughout her entire skull, force distributing through bone structure designed by evolution to handle exactly this kind of desperate application. The masseter muscles, the strongest muscles in the human body relative to their size, contracted with everything she had. The metal made a sound. A tiny stress crack extending from the fracture point. Riley's vision grayed at the edges. The pressure in her skull felt like it would split her head apart. Blood filled her mouth from somewhere, though she couldn't tell if it was her gums or her tongue. Her hands clawed at the tunnel wall, bracing for more force. She thought about Halvor's report, about being shipped back to Earth as proof that humans didn't belong in space, about every person who would be denied opportunities because one xenobiologist had measured bone density and declared an entire species unsuitable. Riley bit down with everything she had. Every muscle in her jaw, every bit of leverage her skull structure could provide, every last desperate ounce of strength that evolution had given her species. The titanium alloy failed. The crack propagated through the stress fracture with a sharp metallic ping. The bent section shifted, twisted by its own weight now that structural integrity was compromised. The shift was only a few inches, but it was enough. The U-shaped barrier that had trapped them was broken. Riley collapsed, her jaw releasing the metal. She tasted blood and chemicals and victory. Her teeth felt loose in her skull, her jaw muscles screaming agony that would probably last for days. But when she ran her tongue over her teeth, they were all still there. Solid, intact. Grevin was already pulling at the shifted metal, using the crack Riley had created to lever the entire section aside. Court and Yenna joined him, their combined strength widening the gap into an opening large enough to crawl through. "Medical bay," Grevin ordered, helping Riley to her feet. Immediately, Riley spat blood onto the tunnel floor. "Geological survey first. Command needs those readings. You just bit through titanium alloy," Yenna said, her voice full of awe and horror. "Your teeth should be shattered. Your jaw should be broken. You need medical attention." Later, Riley retrieved her dropped equipment, though her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it again. "We complete the mission." They made it back to the main station 90 minutes later. The survey data was complete, the mining operation would be delayed pending geological reassessment, and Riley had successfully avoided thinking about what she'd just done. That avoidance lasted until she reached the medical bay. The attending physician was a Kelton named Dr. Morris who'd been trained in multi-species medicine. His expression shifted from professional concern to confusion as he examined Riley's mouth. "I'm seeing dental impressions consistent with high-force contact against metal. Morris said slowly. But no fractures, no cracks, no significant enamel damage. The soft tissue bleeding is minor, likely from gum stress rather than structural failure. That's good news, right? Riley's jaw hurt too much to talk properly. Morris called up comparison data. Human dental structure is rated for approximately 800 newtons of force before catastrophic failure. The impressions in the titanium sample Grevin brought indicate you generated at least 9,000 newtons. Possibly more. Equipment malfunction. Riley suggested hopefully. The impressions are real. The metal failure is real. And your teeth are undamaged. Morris stared at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. I need to run comprehensive scans. This doesn't match any recorded human physiology data. Riley spent the next 3 hours in scanning equipment while Morris consulted with increasingly concerned colleagues. Bite force measurements, jaw muscle density analysis, dental structure evaluation. The numbers came back consistent and impossible. Maximum voluntary bite force, 3,400 newtons. Far beyond anything in the medical literature for human beings. When Dr. Halver arrived, summoned by Morris, his compound eyes literally widened in a display of shock that Riley had never seen from Centaurian. This is impossible, Halver announced, studying the scan results. The skeletal structure cannot support these measurements. The masseter muscles would tear themselves apart, generating this force. They didn't, Morris said simply, gesturing at Riley's intact jaw. Then the measurements are flawed. The equipment is malfunctioning. Halver pulled up his own medical data from Riley's arrival examination. My baseline readings showed 712 newtons of bite force. Standard human range. Run the test again, Riley said through her aching jaw. Right now, use your equipment. Halver's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation. But he retrieved his portable measurement device, the same one he'd used during her initial medical evaluation. He positioned it carefully, ensuring proper calibration. Bite down with normal force, he instructed. Riley bit the measurement pad. The device beeped. Halver stared at the readout. 3,100 newtons. That's impossible. Test her again, Morris suggested. Multiple trials. Different equipment. They spent another hour testing. 6 different measurement devices, 12 separate trials. The results varied slightly, but remained consistent in their impossibility. Riley's bite force exceeded every human record in the Coalition database by more than 400%, and her teeth remained undamaged. Her jaw showed no signs of muscle tearing or skeletal stress. She was uncomfortable and sore, but functionally intact. Halver sat down heavily, his exoskeleton making creaking sounds. I was wrong. My entire assessment was fundamentally flawed. How? Morris asked the question they were all thinking. Riley knew the answer, though she hadn't put it into words yet. You measured structure. You didn't measure function. Halver's mandibles stopped clicking. He looked at her with new understanding. Human evolution optimized for efficient force application, Riley continued, working through it as she spoke. Our jaw muscles are disproportionately powerful relative to skull size. The masseter muscle attachments create mechanical advantage. And under stress, when survival demands it, we can generate forces that far exceed comfortable measurement conditions. Hysterical strength, Morris said quietly. The old Earth phenomenon. We thought it was myth. It's real. Riley touched her sore jaw carefully. And it's not just about muscle strength. It's about what humans evolved to do when there's no other option. The conference room felt smaller than usual with 12 department heads crowded inside. Riley sat at the far end of the table, acutely aware of the attention focused on her. Commander Orith presided from the head position, his aquatic features revealing nothing. Dr. Halver occupied the seat to his right, mandibles occasionally clicking as he reviewed data on his terminal point. 3 days had passed since the Shaft 7 incident. 3 days of additional testing, consultations with xenobiologists across the Coalition network, and increasingly frantic messages from command authorities demanding explanations for impossible data that Riley's jaw still ached. She'd been chewing carefully, avoiding anything harder than station rations. Morris had cleared her for full duty with the caveat that she submit to daily monitoring. The monitoring consisted mostly of various scientists staring at her teeth like they'd reveal ancient secrets. The evidence is conclusive, Halver announced to the assembled group. His voice carried none of its usual confidence. My initial assessment of human physiological capabilities was fundamentally incomplete. I measured structural elements while failing to account for functional application under stress conditions. A Centauri engineer named Perth spoke up. Your initial report stated human bite force averaged 700 newtons. The new measurements show values exceeding 3,000. That's not measurement error. That's a completely different species. Same species, different conditions. Halver pulled up comparative data showing Riley's measurements across multiple tests. Under controlled medical examination, humans demonstrate bite force consistent with their skeletal structure. Under survival conditions, with full adrenaline response and no inhibition of muscular output, they generate forces far beyond predicted capacity. Other species don't show this variance, Perth argued. A Thelusian generates 5,000 newtons whether stressed or calm. A Centaurian maintains 4,000 across all conditions. Why would humans vary so dramatically? Riley had wondered the same thing during her countless testing sessions. Morris had explained it during one of the scans, his Kelton features animated with academic excitement. Human muscular systems included built-in limiters, neurological restrictions that prevented people from generating their maximum possible force under normal conditions. The limiters existed to prevent self-injury, keeping humans from tearing their own muscles or shattering their bones during routine activities. But when survival demanded it, those limiters released. Temporarily, incompletely, but enough to access strength reserves that normally remained locked away. Because we're weak, Riley said into the silence. All eyes turned to her. Compared to most species here, humans have fragile skeletons and vulnerable bodies. We evolved those neurological limiters because accessing our full strength would damage us. But we also evolved the ability to override those limiters when death was the alternative. Grevin leaned forward. You're saying humans are both weaker and stronger than other species? We're adaptable. Riley chose her words carefully. In comfortable conditions, we operate at reduced capacity to preserve our bodies. In survival situations, we access reserves that most species don't have because they don't need them. That's a significant tactical advantage, commented Shurith, Halver's stone-skinned assistant. An opponent might calculate human capabilities based on baseline measurements and drastically underestimate combat potential. Or overestimate durability, Riley countered. Using the reserved strength damages us. I was lucky my teeth didn't shatter. Someone else might not be. Commander Orith finally spoke. Dr. Halver, your revised report reaches what conclusions? Halver's mandibles clicked several times before he answered. That coalition assessment protocols for human crew members require complete revision. We cannot rely on structural analysis alone. Functional testing under varied conditions is necessary, and human assignments should emphasize adaptability roles rather than restricted categories. Specifically, humans should not be excluded from EVA operations, emergency response, or equipment handling. Their capability to exceed baseline performance under stress makes them suitable for exactly those high-pressure situations. Halver pulled up a new document. I'm recommending expanded human recruitment for frontier stations and revision of current limitation protocols. Riley blinked. That was almost the opposite of Halver's original report. Perth wasn't satisfied. One human exceeded expectations in a crisis. That doesn't mean the entire species shares this capability, which is why I've requested comprehensive testing of all human crew members throughout the coalition. Halver displayed a growing data set. Early returns from other stations show consistent patterns. Humans demonstrate significant force generation beyond baseline predictions when properly motivated. Properly motivated meaning life-threatening situations. Yenna added quietly from her position near the door. We can't exactly create those conditions for every test. Morris had joined the meeting via holoconference from the medical bay. His image flickered slightly as he spoke. The medical data suggests this capability extends beyond bite force. Human muscular systems generally show similar patterns of reserve capacity. We're documenting cases of exceptional strength, endurance, and recovery across multiple stations. How do we miss this? Ortha's question sounded almost philosophical. Because we measured them while they were comfortable, Halver said simply. We assessed baseline performance and assumed that represented maximum capacity. It was methodologically sound for every other species we've studied. Humans are the outliers. The meeting continued for another hour. Discussion ranged from revised training protocols to new assessment criteria for human applicants. Riley contributed when asked, but mostly listened as the scientific community grappled with overturning assumptions they'd held about her species. When the meeting finally adjourned, Grevin caught her in the corridor outside. His scales had taken on the darker hue that indicated serious thought among Thelusians. You knew, he said without preamble. Before Shaft 7, you knew humans could do more than Halver's report suggested. Riley considered denying it, but Grevin had earned honesty. I knew we were tougher than the measurements indicated. I didn't know by how much. And I definitely didn't know I could bite through titanium alloy without losing teeth. You could have died. Your jaw could have shattered. Your teeth could have fractured into your brain. We were already dying, slowly from oxygen deprivation, but just as dead. Riley met his eyes. I chose the faster option with a chance of success. Grevin's expression shifted to something that might have been respect. Your species is either very brave or very foolish. Can it be both? That surprised a rumbling laugh from him. Perhaps. Will you join me for evening meal? I'd like to hear more about Earth evolution. Specifically, what pressures created creatures insane enough to override their own safety systems. Riley agreed, though she suspected the real conversation would be about how humans fit into a galaxy that had underestimated them. It was a conversation the entire coalition would be having soon enough. In her quarters that night, Riley reviewed messages from Earth. Her parents expressing concern about the incident report. Friends congratulating her on becoming famous throughout the frontier stations. A message from her old academy professor asking if she'd be willing to consult on revised xenobiology curriculum. But the message that caught her attention came from Commander Orth. Short, direct, in his typical style. Report to my office tomorrow at 0800. Coalition leadership has questions about expanding human presence on frontier stations. They want your perspective on recruitment and training protocols. Consider this your new secondary assignment. Riley read it 3 times. She'd come to Station Galileo to study geology. Now she was apparently consulting on human integration throughout the coalition. She touched her still sore jaw, remembering the taste of titanium and blood and desperation. Remembered the impossible moment when the metal failed because she'd refused to accept that humans were too weak for this life. Maybe they weren't too weak. Maybe they were exactly what the frontier needed. People who could exceed their own limitations when survival demanded it. Riley opened a response to Orth. 0800 confirmed. I have recommendations. She did have recommendations. Lots of them. Starting with, stop measuring humans in comfortable medical bays and expecting those numbers to mean anything when reality got difficult. The morning briefing included representatives from 6 coalition worlds, all connected via holoconference. Riley sat beside Commander Orth, acutely aware that she was the only human in a discussion about human capabilities. Dr. Halver occupied a position to her left, his revised reports distributed to all participants. Admiral Torvax, a senior Centaurian officer, spoke first. His image flickered slightly across the light years separating Station Galileo from Coalition's Central Command. Dr. Halver's revised assessment is troubling. Not because humans are more capable than initially believed, but because our evaluation methodology failed so completely. If we misjudged one species this badly, what else have we overlooked? With respect, Admiral, we didn't fail completely. Halver's mandibles clicked defensively. Human skeletal analysis was accurate. Bone density measurements were precise. The error was assuming structure predicted function without accounting for adaptive response mechanisms. An error that nearly resulted in categorizing an entire species as unsuitable for frontier operations. Counter-Director Sean, a Kelton administrator whose jurisdiction included human recruitment throughout the coalition. We're fortunate Miss Cross had opportunity to demonstrate actual capability before those restrictions became policy. Riley shifted uncomfortably. Being discussed as a test case never got less awkward. Orith gestured for attention. The practical question before us: how do we accurately assess species whose capabilities vary dramatically based on environmental stressors? And specifically, how do we develop appropriate protocols for human crew members? We've been gathering data from other stations. Morris chimed in from his medical bay connection. 23 human crew members across 14 facilities have undergone comprehensive testing. The results are consistent. Humans demonstrate approximately 3 to 4 times their baseline force generation capacity when subjected to high-stress scenarios. A Thelusian general named Corvin growled thoughtfully. Other physical capabilities? Endurance shows similar patterns. Recovery from injury exceeds predictions. Thermal regulation operates across wider ranges than structural analysis suggested. Morris displayed comparative data. Humans are physiologically optimized for adaptability rather than peak performance in any single category. That's an odd evolutionary strategy, observed a Pick scientist named Dr. Wellier, her furry features scrunched in concentration. Most successful species specialize. Humans seem to have evolved as generalists. Riley finally spoke up. Earth was unpredictable. Climate varied wildly. Predators changed across regions. Food sources were inconsistent. Humans evolved to survive anywhere rather than thrive in specific conditions. We're not the fastest, strongest, or most durable, but we can function in more environments than most species. Interesting in theory, Admiral Torvac said, but frontier stations require reliability. If human performance varies based on stress levels, how do we ensure consistent operations? The same way you do with every species, Riley replied. Training, protocols, supervision. My performance in Shaft 7 wasn't random. I made a calculated decision based on available options and success probability. Desperate, yes, but not uncontrolled. Halver pulled up neurological scans. The human stress response includes enhanced cognitive function alongside physical capability increases. Heart rate elevates. Adrenaline floods the system, but decision-making remains intact. They don't simply become stronger. They become more capable overall. For how long? Corvin pressed. Our data shows Thelusian combat effectiveness remains consistent across extended operations. Human stress responses must have duration limits. Morris nodded. Approximately 30 to 40 minutes of peak performance before exhaustion sets in. Recovery requires rest periods. It's not sustainable for extended operations, but it's renewable, Riley added. Give a human 8 hours rest, and they can do it again. We're not good at sustained peak performance, but we excel at repeated high-intensity bursts. The discussion continued, ranging across topics from training modifications to equipment redesign. Several participants questioned whether humans were worth the complications. Others argued that adaptability itself had strategic value in unpredictable frontier conditions. Riley listened more than she spoke, learning how coalition leadership evaluated species integration. The calculations were complex, balancing capability against risk, potential against proven performance. Humans were an unknown variable in equations that previously had clear answers. During a brief recess, Yenna approached with 2 cups of something that approximated Earth coffee. You're being very patient with them. They're trying to categorize something that doesn't fit their existing framework. Riley accepted the cup gratefully. It's frustrating, but they're not wrong to be cautious. They're treating your entire species like experimental subjects. Welcome to being the newcomers in an established civilization. Riley sipped the not-quite coffee. Every species went through this when they joined the coalition. Humans are just doing it more publicly because we broke someone's assessment model. Yenna's ears twitched with amusement. You broke a lot more than that. Halvor's entire career was built on xenobiological assessment methodology. You prove his approach fundamentally incomplete. Riley had been trying not to think about that. Halvor had been professional throughout the review process, accepting his errors and working to correct them. But his reputation had taken damage. Other xenobiologists were questioning his previous assessments of different species. Academic papers were being retracted. A career's worth of work was under scrutiny. "He's handling it better than I would," Riley admitted. "He's Centaurian. They value accuracy over pride." Yenna glanced at the conference room where participants were returning. Unlike some species who would deny the data rather than admit mistakes, the afternoon session focused on practical implementation. Director Shun proposed a pilot program expanding human recruitment while maintaining enhanced monitoring protocols. Admiral Torvax wanted humans restricted to support roles until more data accumulated. Corvin suggested creating specialized human units for high-stress operations. "We're not special forces soldiers," Riley objected to Corvin's proposal. "Most humans are scientists, engineers, technicians. We came to the frontier for research and exploration, not combat operations." "But your capabilities make you suitable for tactical applications," Corvin argued. "A unit of humans trained for emergency response could operate in conditions that would overwhelm other species." "Could, maybe. Should is a different question." Riley stood, tired of being discussed as equipment rather than people. "Humans didn't join the coalition to become your crisis intervention teams. We joined to contribute to exploration, research, and development. Using us primarily for dangerous operations because we can survive them is like using a precision instrument as a hammer just because it won't break." The room went quiet. Riley realized she'd probably overstepped, but she didn't sit down. Ortha's expression was unreadable. "You object to humans taking dangerous assignments? I object to pigeonholing an entire species based on one dramatic capability demonstration." Riley gestured at the displayed data. "Yes, humans can exceed baseline performance under stress. We can also conduct geological surveys, analyze ecosystems, design equipment, and contribute to research. Don't waste us on jobs nobody else wants just because we might survive them." Admiral Torvax's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. "A fair point. Director Shun, your pilot program should emphasize diverse roles rather than specialized applications." The discussion shifted, becoming more nuanced. Rather than categorizing humans into narrow functions, the coalition representatives began exploring how human adaptability could benefit various departments. Riley sat back down, her heart still pounding from the confrontation. Grevin's voice came quietly from behind her. "Well said." Riley hadn't noticed him enter. "I probably shouldn't have yelled at an admiral." "You didn't yell. You advocated. There's a difference." Grevin moved to stand beside Orith. "If I may contribute to this discussion?" Orith nodded permission. "I've worked directly with Ms. Cross for 3 weeks. Observe her in routine operations, crisis situations, and recovery periods. Human capabilities are impressive, but their judgment is equally valuable." Grevin pulled up field reports. Riley's decision-making in Shaft 7 saved 4 lives. Not because she had exceptional bite force, but because she accurately assessed the situation, calculated odds, and executed a desperate plan with precision. "The Thelusian makes a valid observation," Dr. Wellier added. "We're focusing on physical capabilities while overlooking cognitive advantages. Human pattern recognition and adaptive problem-solving show distinct characteristics." Morris contributed medical data supporting that assessment. Halvor added neurological studies. The conversation evolved from "what can humans do" to "how do humans think?" Riley found herself answering questions about human decision-making processes, risk evaluation, and crisis response. Not as a test subject, but as an expert on her own species. It was a subtle but significant shift. By the time the session concluded, several decisions had been reached. Human recruitment would expand cautiously across multiple departments. Assessment protocols would include stress response evaluation alongside baseline measurements. Training programs would emphasize human strengths without exploiting their higher risk tolerance. Most importantly, humans would be evaluated as individuals rather than categorized solely by species capabilities. You did well today, Orith told Riley as the holo-conference connections terminated. Leadership needed to hear perspective beyond scientific data. I probably should have been more diplomatic. Diplomacy is overrated when honesty is required. Orith pulled up new assignment orders on his terminal. Coalition Command wants you to visit 3 other frontier stations over the next month. Share your experiences, consult on human integration protocols, evaluate local conditions. Riley stared at the travel schedule. I'm a geologist, not a recruitment specialist. You're a human who understands what other humans need to succeed in frontier conditions. That's more valuable than another geological survey right now. Orith's expression softened slightly. Consider it temporary duty. Once human integration protocols stabilize, you'll return to your geological work. It wasn't really a request, but Riley appreciated Orith framing it as one. What about Shaft 7 analysis? Court finished the survey. Mining operations are suspended pending structural reinforcement. Your recommendations saved Coalition Mining Consortium approximately 40 million credits in disaster recovery costs. Orith closed his terminal. They're proposing you for a commendation. I suggested they make it monetary instead. Riley couldn't help smiling. Much more practical. She left Orith's office to find Yenna waiting in the corridor. The small engineer bounced excitedly. You're getting famous. Everyone's talking about the human who bit through titanium. That's definitely not how I wanted to be famous. Too late. You're a legend. Yenna fell in a step beside her. Also, Dr. Halver wants to buy you dinner. Something about apologizing for nearly ruining human integration with faulty assessments. He doesn't need to apologize. Science is about updating conclusions when new data emerges. Tell him that. He's been clicking his mandibles nonstop for 3 days. Yenna paused. Are you okay with all this? The attention, the new assignment, being the human example for everyone. Riley considered the question carefully. Was she okay with it? Not entirely. She'd come to the frontier for quiet research work, not public demonstrations of human capability. But someone needed to help the coalition understand her species. And she'd rather be involved in that process than let others define humans based solely on scientific measurements. I'm okay with it, Riley finally answered. Besides, it's temporary. Once they figure out humans aren't going to randomly bite through their stations, I can go back to geology. Yenna's ears twitched skeptically, but she didn't argue. 6 weeks later, Riley stood in a conference room on Station Meridian, facing another group of skeptical department heads. This was her 4th station visit, and the pattern had become familiar. Initial doubt, careful questions, gradual acceptance that humans might actually belong on the frontier. The difference this time was the presence of other humans. 3 of them recently arrived as part of the expanded recruitment program. They watched Riley with expressions mixing hope and nervousness. The concern, said Station Director Vross, a Thelusian with more scars than Grevin, is consistency. We cannot design operations around capabilities that only manifest during crisis situations. Riley had heard variations of this concern at every station. You already do that with every species. Thelusians perform better in high-temperature environments. Centaurians show enhanced capability in low-light conditions. Kelton cognitive function improves in high-humidity settings. Nobody expects peak performance constantly from any species. But those variations are predictable and modest. Vross gestured at the displayed data. Humans potentially triple their baseline capability under stress. That's not a variation. That's a transformation. Only if you think baseline measurement represents our actual working capability. Riley pulled up revised assessment data that Halver had developed over the past month. New protocols measure human performance across multiple stress levels. What we used to call baseline was really our minimum operating capacity. Normal working conditions generate enough stimulation that humans typically function at higher levels. One of the new human arrivals, a young man named Peter Cruz who specialized in systems engineering, spoke up hesitantly. So we're not actually weak under normal conditions? No, you're efficient. Riley smiled at him. Humans evolved to conserve energy during routine activities. But routine work in frontier stations isn't truly routine. The cognitive load, environmental challenges, and operational demands keep us engaged at elevated capacity without requiring crisis-level response. The station's chief medical officer, a Kelton named Dr. Saris, nodded agreement. Early observations support this conclusion. Our human crew members maintain stable performance approximately 50% above original baseline predictions during standard operations. And during actual emergencies? Vross pressed. They perform like every other species. They do whatever necessary to survive and help others survive. Riley met his eyes steadily. Sometimes that means exceeding previous performance records. Sometimes it means knowing when to retreat. The key is judgment, not just capability. The discussion continued, but Riley could feel the shift happening. Vross wasn't trying to exclude humans. He was trying to understand how to integrate them safely and effectively. That was progress. After the meeting, Peter approached Riley with another new arrival, a woman named Dr. Amara Singh who had transferred from a research station in a safer sector. Is it always like this? Peter asked, being questioned about everything we can do. For now, yes. Give it another year, and humans will just be part of normal station operations. Riley glanced at the third new arrival, a quiet technician named David Okonkwo, who was examining a wall panel with professional interest. How are you three settling in? Everyone's very polite, Amara said carefully. Very careful around us. Like we're going to suddenly hulk out and break something. Riley laughed. That'll fade. Once they see you performing routine work competently, the mystique disappears. Grevin treats me like a normal colleague now. Sometimes he even forgets I'm human until I mention something about Earth. Did you really bite through titanium alloy? David asked, his first words since the meeting started. Grade 5, yes. During a cave-in, when we were trapped. Riley touched her jaw, which had finally stopped aching last week. Not my proudest moment, but it got the job done. That's insane, Peter said with clear admiration. And awesome. It was desperate and painful, and I wouldn't recommend it. Riley softened the words with a smile. The point isn't that humans can do impossible things sometimes. The point is that we can do our jobs well consistently. Don't let the dramatic stories make you think you have to be exceptional all the time. Amar's expression showed relief. I was worried I'd be expected to perform miracles. You'll be expected to do your work competently and learn station operations. Same as everyone else. Riley checked her schedule. I'm heading back to Galileo tomorrow. Orith finally agreed I've done enough consulting and can return to actual geology. You three need anything before I leave. They talked for another hour, Riley answering questions about frontier station life that had nothing to do with bite force measurements or crisis performance. Practical information about dealing with mixed-species crews, navigating different cultural expectations, managing homesickness while light years from Earth. That evening, Riley shared a meal with Station Meridian senior staff. Vross had relaxed considerably after the formal meeting, sharing stories about his own early days on frontier stations when Thelusians were still proving themselves to the Coalition. Every species goes through this period of scrutiny, he told Riley. Centaurians were initially dismissed as fragile because their exoskeletons seemed vulnerable. Kelton were considered unsuitable for leadership roles because their communication style differed from established norms. We all had to demonstrate worth beyond initial assessments. How long did it take? Riley asked. For Thelusians? Approximately 15 standard years before we were fully integrated. But Coalition membership was smaller then, information spread slower, and we didn't have dramatic incidents to accelerate the process. Vross's expression suggested amusement. Your titanium-biting adventure probably shortened human integration by a decade. I'll add that to my list of career accomplishments. Geologist, consultant, titanium biter, integration accelerator. The Thelusians' rumbling laugh drew attention from other diners. You should add advocate to that list. The reports from your station visits show consistent improvement in human crew treatment and understanding. Riley hadn't thought about it that way. She'd been focused on answering questions and correcting misconceptions, not on advocacy. But maybe that was the same thing. She returned to Station Galileo the next day, stepping off the transport to find Grevin waiting. "Welcome back. Orith wants to see you before you unpack." Of course he does. Riley followed Grevin through familiar corridors, noting small changes during her 6-week absence. New equipment in the labs, different crew members in common areas. Station life had continued without her. Exactly as it should. Orith's office looked the same. The commander gestured for Riley to sit, then pulled up a document on his terminal. Coalition Command approved permanent human integration protocols yesterday. Your consultation reports were cited extensively in the final policy. That's good news. Very good. Human recruitment is expanding across all frontier operations. New assessment methodology based on Halvor's revised framework will be implemented throughout the coalition. Orith paused. They want you to join the Integration Advisory Committee. Permanent position, based here, but with regular travel to review implementation. Riley had been expecting something like this. She'd gotten too involved in human integration to simply return to full-time geology. How much travel? 30% of your time. The rest you'd spend on your original research assignments. Orith's expression suggested he knew what her answer would be. You'd effectively be doing what you've been doing for the past month and a half, but with official authority and better compensation. It wasn't what Riley had planned when she joined Station Galileo. She'd imagined years of quiet research, mapping geological formations and analyzing mineral compositions. Important work, but solitary work. Instead, she'd become the person who explained humans to the galaxy, who advocated for her species, who helped other humans navigate frontier operations. "I'll do it," Riley said, "on one condition, which is I want to finish the Tethys 7 geological survey I started before Shaft 7 collapsed. That data matters, and I don't want it lost in administrative work." Orith's expression might have been a smile. "Agreed." Grevin volunteered to assist with the survey. "He says you're the only geologist who makes field work interesting." Riley laughed. "He means I'm the only one who accidentally triggers cave-ins." "Perhaps, but you're also the one who gets everyone out alive." Orith closed his terminal. "Welcome to your new dual assignment, Dr. Cross. Try not to bite through any more critical infrastructure." Over the following months, Riley settled into her expanded role. She completed the Tethys 7 survey, published 3 papers on crystalline formation patterns, and visited 7 more stations to consult on human integration. The work was harder than pure research, but more rewarding than she'd expected. Humans continued arriving at frontier stations. Some performed exceptionally. Some struggled with adjustment. All benefited from protocols that understood their capabilities without expecting miracles. Halvor published a comprehensive revision of xenobiological assessment methodology that became required reading throughout coalition scientific communities. His career recovered as colleagues recognized the value of admitting errors and improving methods. He and Riley developed a respectful working relationship built on shared commitment to accurate science. 1 year after the Shaft 7 incident, Riley attended a coalition conference on species integration. Admiral Torvax approached her during a reception, his Centaurian features arranged in what she'd learned to recognize as approval. "Dr. Cross, your species has exceeded expectations. We're just doing our jobs, Admiral. Same as everyone else." "Precisely. That was the goal." Torvax gestured at the diverse crowd of coalition personnel. "Every species represented here went through similar integration challenges. Humans accomplished it faster than most, partly due to your efforts." Riley spotted Peter, Amara, and David across the room, talking comfortably with mixed-species colleagues. They'd all stayed at their assigned stations, contributing to operations without needing special accommodations or generating more dramatic incidents. Exactly what successful integration looked like. "We had help," Riley said, "and we had something to prove. That's a powerful combination." "Indeed." Torvax paused, then added, "For what it's worth, I apologize for initially suggesting humans be restricted to support roles. That recommendation was premature and poorly considered. You were being cautious. That's reasonable when integrating a new species. Riley smiled. Besides, it worked out. Nothing motivates humans quite like being told we can't do something. The Admiral's mandibles clicked with what was definitely amusement. A useful trait for frontier operations. The galaxy remains full of challenges people claim are impossible. Riley thought about titanium alloy stress fractures and her aching jaw and 3 colleagues waiting to suffocate in a collapsed tunnel. Thought about every human who'd come to the frontier despite being told they were too fragile, too weak, too unsuitable for this life. Impossible just means nobody's tried hard enough yet, Riley said. Humans are pretty good at trying hard. She excused herself from the Admiral and joined Yenna near the refreshment station. The pick engineer had traveled from Station Galileo for the conference, mainly to present research on cross-species equipment design. You look very official talking to Admiral Torvax, Yenna teased. Should I start calling you Ambassador Cross? Please don't. I'm still just a geologist who accidentally became relevant to xenobiological policy. Riley accepted a cup of something that still wasn't quite coffee. How's Galileo? Busy. Orith approved expansion of the mining operations after your structural reinforcement recommendations. We're also getting 3 more human crew members next month. Yenna's ears twitched with amusement. One of them specifically requested assignment to work with the human who bit titanium. You're inspiring new recruits. Riley groaned. That story will haunt me forever. Could be worse. You could be famous for failing spectacularly instead of succeeding impossibly. They talked about station gossip, research projects, and the continuing evolution of human integration throughout the coalition. Eventually, Grevin joined them, having completed his own conference obligations. I have news, the Thelusian announced. Coalition Command approved Galileo's proposal to establish the first mixed-species emergency response team. They want humans included in the pilot program. Riley raised an eyebrow. Because we can exceed baseline performance under stress. Because you maintain judgment while exceeding performance. That combination makes you valuable for crisis situations. Grevin's expression was serious. This isn't about exploiting human capabilities. It's about building teams that complement each other's strengths. That sounded better than some previous proposals Riley had heard. Who else is on this team? Thelusian strength, Centaurian analytical capability, pick technical skill, human adaptability. Balanced composition for varied emergency scenarios. Grevin paused. They asked if you would consider joining as team lead. I'm a geologist, not an emergency responder. You're a geologist who has experience with actual emergencies and demonstrated leadership under crisis conditions. Grevin's tone suggested he'd already made this argument to command. Plus, you understand human capabilities better than anyone else available. Riley looked at Yenna, who shrugged. Your life got complicated the moment you bit through that metal. Might as well embrace it. I need to think about it, Riley said finally. Talk to Orith. See what it would mean for my other work. But she already knew she'd probably accept. Not because she wanted to be an emergency responder, but because mixed-species teams represented the future of coalition operations. If humans were going to be part of that future, someone needed to help figure out how to make it work. 3 days later, back on Station Galileo, Riley stood in the empty conference room where her journey had begun. The same room where Halvar had presented his initial assessment, declaring humans unsuitable for frontier operations. Where concerns about human fragility had almost prevented her species from proving their worth. She pulled up the final integration report on the wall display. Graphs showing human performance across multiple stations. Assessment data from dozens of crew members. Success rates, incident reports, commendations earned. The complete picture of 1 year of expanded human presence on the frontier. The data was clear. Humans belonged here. Not because they could occasionally exceed impossible physical standards, but because they contributed effectively to operations, adapted to diverse conditions, and worked well with other species, that Riley's personal communicator chimed. Message from Orith. Emergency response team orientation starts next week. Your attendance is strongly recommended. She smiled and sent back a simple confirmation. Then she pulled up geological survey data from Tethys 7, ready to return to the work that had brought her to the frontier in the first place. Because that was the real point of integration. Not proving humans could do spectacular things occasionally, but demonstrating they could do ordinary things consistently well. Research, engineering, operations, all the daily work that kept frontier stations functioning. The spectacular moments made good stories, but the ordinary moments made good lives. Riley saved her work and headed to the geological lab. Time to do her actual job. Time to be a geologist who just happened to be human, rather than a human who accidentally became famous for exceptional bite force. Though she did keep a piece of beef jerky in her pocket. Old habits, practical nutrition, and a reminder that sometimes the ordinary preparation was exactly what made the extraordinary possible. Outside the lab windows, Tethys 7 rotated slowly against the star field. A harsh moon full of unstable geology and dangerous formations and opportunities for discovery. The frontier wasn't kind, wasn't easy, wasn't designed for any single species, but it had room for everyone willing to work hard and adapt. And humans, it turned out, were very good at both.